Dayne Stevens is a local artist working in marker, colored pencil, and woodblocks. Recently, expressive portraits and characters have been filling his time. Dayne shares how his drawings portray a mix of emotion and how those emotions have been a big part of his life in recent years. I'm Amy, and he's Brent, and this is La Crosse Local.
So I'm Dayne Stevens. I was born in La Crosse, but raised in Holman. A lot of what got me into creativity, I'd probably say, is my uncle. My uncle, Paul Hartwig, is also another local artist. He had gone to Viterbo, and I grew up around that a lot. Got a lot of art supplies growing up as a kid as gifts. I'd go to museums, art museums, as well as like science museums and stuff like that, and like just the displays and stuff. I was always a very visual learner, still am. Just a lot of that drew me into it, just a lot of exposure. Then it was just really fun.
So for someone who's never seen your work before, I've just had the privilege of checking it out over the last couple of weeks. For someone who hasn't seen it, can you describe what they could potentially be looking at?
For the most part, I do a lot of like portrait work. It's not very realistic. Let's say you could kind of think of it. I've had some comparisons drawn to like cubism and fauvism, but I'd also say there's a little bit of like stained glass feel going on, primarily because of all of the separations of like block color. There's a lot of block color usage, separation with relatively thick black lines. That's what I've been doing a lot more lately than when I first started exploring my current style about a year ago. So that's probably how I would explain it. Kind of like fauvism meets cubism meets stained glass, but it's all in marker that kind of looks almost watercolor-like.
From what I've seen and kind of what you mentioned there, you also work with block printing. How did that come about? I mean, you talked about using markers, but then it's also like you're creating it by carving out the grooves and things like that as well.
Block printing, that actually started about a month into the whole coronavirus thing, having to social distance constantly and all of that. A friend of mine, actually, because of suddenly not having a whole lot of stuff to do in his free time, was spring cleaning, and he had a bunch of block printing supplies, a bunch of screen printing supplies that he just wasn't using, kind of fallen away from those kinds of hobbies. So he hit me up and gave me a bunch of this material. I hadn't done anything like block printing since like middle school, and that was forever ago now. Yeah, so I just gave it a go. I just dove right into it. I found it like relatively easy to try to convert my style to that, and I found it to be really useful actually at propelling my style forward when it comes to bouncing back over to marker and colored pencil work.
I've been talking with a lot of artists and musicians over the last couple of weeks related to, as you mentioned, COVID, and you talked about utilizing the block printing with that. How was your experience with COVID and creativity kind of aligned or not aligned?
It was definitely a struggle towards the beginning. I think the block printing really gave me something fresh to look at and try. That helped me spur some more creativity, but there was almost like a month before I actually started touching those blocks where I just barely even drew anything. It was very different for me because the majority of the time prior to COVID, I'd be out in a coffee shop or in a bar just sitting there with a sketchbook and a pencil and like sketching out my ideas for my next drawings just based on the random people in the bars. Like I just see interesting shapes that could be made on people's faces and go from there. But I'm also a very social person, very, very extroverted. So the energy drain from not being around people, and then this creative drain from not seeing as many faces as I normally do, it was definitely really, really challenging. But I think that the block printing gave me kind of a swift kick to like, oh, I don't need to be in those environments to be creative.
The characters you draw, they seem to portray a mix of emotion, though they're very colorful. Sadness in there, some family sort of aspects of it. What are you going for, with these pieces? Because not in a negative way, they seem repetitive, as you said, and they seem to have some emotional feel. What is the reason for it?
So a lot of my current pieces revolve around just like self-discovery, exploration, self-improvement, and reflection. Last year, Pride, I actually came out as queer in a few ways. So that was a pretty big thing. I made a lot of other really major life changes in the past year, made tons of friends, and got way more involved in general in different aspects of my life rather than just like letting whatever take me wherever. A pretty reoccurring theme is the eyes not looking in the same direction. It's usually cross-eyed or something like that. There's a handful where they're actually focused in the same direction. Also, this element of like confusion, but happiness. Like there's a lot going on in them. You're right. Color-wise as well, that kind of reflects on the confusion, but as well the joy, because they're very vibrant. That handful of them are crying. Both sadness and happiness there.
It is so very vibrant with color. Why do you prefer that medium? Is it, just something that you sketch first to move on, or is it just always colored pencils and markers that's your go-to? Why do you prefer that medium?
It actually stemmed out of a lack of space. Prior to this style, I was doing a lot of acrylic and oil, geometric abstracts kind of stuff, mostly like abstract cityscape work. But right now, I actually live in a place where I no longer have a studio. I had a studio space for a brief period of time, which allowed me to have a tarp down and everything, and it was decently ventilated. Now I'm in this space right now where I'm sitting between my bed, my desk for work, and my drafting table, and it's all very tight together. So a lot of it was just the limitation in space, no ventilation, that kind of stuff. And then it kind of segued into, I really like the control that I have with markers and colored pencil.
Just from what I'm looking at, there's been a lot of changes in your life and it's kind of more dialed in with using that format. What's next for you?
I recently got 22 blocks to carve. I've been planning on a while for a project of creating my own tarot card deck in kind of my style of the way that I've been doing my block carvings so far. That's probably my next thing. Besides that, once there's this shared studio space that a few other artists and I have been talking about and working on for a bit actually becomes a reality, I want to get back into oil painting specifically and try to apply what I've been doing now, but with oil. I think would be a very interesting task to take on.
And the shared space, is that the one with Ashton Hall?
Yeah.
Essentially, in the footwear building?
Yep.
Cool.
Yep. So it's been really fun getting to know Ashton and a bunch of the other artists that have gathered within her gallery space in the last few months as well.
So where can people find out more about you and follow along?
It's really just my Instagram, Dayne Stevens _art. Other than that, I have a website, it's DayneStevens.com. Working on actually getting prints of marker drawings eventually up for sale there as well.
La Crosse Local Podcast is a production of River Travel Media. Do you have an interview idea you would like to share with us? Message us on Facebook at La Crosse Locals. Subscribe to the La Crosse Local Podcast on your favorite podcast app. If you like us, rate us 5 stars. We thank you for it.